So welcome to this web chat. I'm very pleased to be joined by one of the university's alumna, Catriona, who studied Biosciences between 2014 and 2017. Have I remembered that right?
Yeah.
And was involved in the music department in the chamber choir and chorus and Minerva Voices, the upper voices choir that we ran. And has since gone on, as we'll hear, to become involved in the costume making industry. So, Catriona, just tell us a little bit about what you've been up to since you left Kent and so on.
Yeah, so I left Kent July 2017, and I got a place on a postgraduate diploma in theatre costume at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. Mm-hmm. And I spent 2 years there training, learning the different techniques for making costumes, mainly for theatre. And part of the course was working on the different shows they put on with their third-year actors. Mm-hmm. I learnt about millinery, tailoring, corset making, hair and makeup, that kind of thing. And then in my final year, I did 3 sort of projects that were things that I designed and wanted to make, mm-hmm. and a couple of supervisory roles on the shows. And then I graduated in July 2019. And within a week of graduating, I got offered a job by someone who had been a tutor whilst I was in my first year. Mm-hmm. And suddenly I was getting up at 5:15 in the morning, driving along to work and working on beautiful costumes on Netflix's Bridgerton. So
that's quite something, isn't it? Because Bridgerton is currently screening at the moment and is a huge hit, yeah. Isn't it, on Netflix? Yeah. And you were actually part of the ladies' wear costumes, is that right?
Yeah, principal ladies' wear. So it was quite sort of jump in the deep end. Mm-hmm. Sort of, yeah, going from working 10 till 5, doing your own thing, and sort of having as many sort of breaks when you wanted them sometimes.
Yeah.
To sort of then going into the workplace and being like, okay, we've got to get this done. These are the tight turnovers and that kind of thing. So it was.
And how did that opportunity arise then? Because I mean, that's quite a marvelous thing to have been involved in a week after having completed your course. How did that opportunity occur?
So the way I got into it was a tutor who taught us tailoring in my first year. She stayed in touch with us, like to see what we were doing, and she'd come in during my second year to teach the new first year's tailoring, and mm-hmm. She popped across to see what we were doing. We were all frantically preparing for our graduate exhibition and sort of padding out mannequins to put our costumes on, and do we have enough, and applying for jobs and all that kind of thing. And she was asking what we were interested in, what our areas of expertise were, and she sort of took a note of what people were interested in. And as it happened, a couple of us both were into historical wear, wanted to make rather than supervise. And so then when she was working on this job, I think they were looking for trainees, and she seemed to like what I was doing. So I got this phone call and saying, do you want to come and work on this? I was like, yes, please, I'll take any job I can right now. And sort of jumped into it.
And I mean, that was the period from July towards, how long were you working on the project for?
So I was there until February 2020, right at the end.
So right before lockdown then?
Yeah. I finished that job about 2-3 weeks before we officially went into a lockdown. Right. I'd done some sort of in-between work leading up to that happening, not anticipating it was going to happen. I finished working on Bridgerton and then decided to have a week holiday as a little break. And I had 2 weeks of work lined up working with National Centre of Circus Arts which I believe is linked to Kent. I don't know how, but apparently they're linked.
Right. Okay.
And I'd worked with them as part of my work experience in my final year at RADA, and I'd returned to sort of just do some alterations, make the odd thing. And so I'd started that work, and it was within that week that it was advised that theatres close. And so I was like, okay, what's going to happen here? Because it was a showcase for the final year circus students. And I thought, okay, I start on the Monday, it'll get to next Thursday, it'll be done, and I'll just have to see what's happening. And gradually that Thursday deadline moved to the Saturday before, then the Friday, and then the Thursday. And I got this phone call saying, we're doing a show now, can you get into town? And sort of I was finishing off making something for one of the third year students and had to sort of go, okay, I'll finish it on the train, and sort of jumped onto the car and onto the train with all these bags of costumes and sort of going, how am I going to make it? And it was very sort of surreal knowing that the industry that I knew in London was shutting down, but not knowing what was going to happen, because there was rumours of a national lockdown, but there wasn't anything solid. I think the most I knew at that point was that they were talking about closing London down, but knowing that the theatres were already having to, and often I think because of the wording of it, that they were advised to shut down rather than actually telling them to shut down, there was a lot of them worried about insurance and that kind of thing. And I think on the Thursday I went in and they did this wonderful show. They hadn't done any techs or dress rehearsals. It was all just, let's see what we can do, let's have fun, let's make the most of it. And that's something so wonderful about theatre, and particularly the circus industry, because they are such a family and they are really there for each other. So it was wonderful sort of finishing that part of that job with such an idea of family, to then have a week of going, I don't know what's going to happen, my industry is closed down, I don't know when my next job is, and then going into lockdown. I was like, okay, let's feed off that energy for a bit and see what happens.
Yeah. And of course, presumably all the time you were waiting for Bridgerton to arrive on our screens.
Yeah. So I didn't know when it was coming out or anything. I was sort of flicking through different social medias going, when's it coming, and I found out when the rest of the world found out it was coming out, and it was sort of our work chat, we were sort of going, it's coming, we can look forward to this.
Fantastically exciting. Yeah. So what was your experience like working on something like that, from having, graduated a scant 7 days before to suddenly being flung into something really quite high profile?
Yeah, so it was it took probably a month or so to get my head around what was actually, like, what was happening, where I was and what I was doing, because it was so different to what I'd experienced before, because we're encouraged to do work experience as part of our RADA course. And I'd gone to Birmingham Costume Hire and done a week at the National Theatre and worked at the circus school. And a lot of that wasn't so much a fully established workroom, but you could sort of, at the National, they had the ladies' wear workroom, the men's wear workroom, so I could see how they'd sort of been established. And then sort of you hear from different people how different workrooms work. And it was really wonderful that the workroom I went into was very much about learning from each other and developing yourselves and playing to each other's strengths, but not just that, but trying to teach others so that they can bring in other stuff as well in future. It was very much about sort of bettering each other and ourselves, which is a wonderful environment to be part of. There's some workrooms where it's very much like you do what you do and stick with it, and that can work really well for certain jobs and that kind of thing. But as someone entering into the industry, having that workroom environment where it was safe to still be learning, it was really, really useful.
Did you have a boss who was interested in showing you the ropes?
Yeah, so it was my my boss, who was head cutter. She she was, because she taught us at RADA, you could definitely tell that she was very much interested in bringing in new people and getting people to learn new things. So it was wonderful to have that around and be very sort of positive about learning new things and developing what you already have. And there's some things that I'll have picked up at RADA that I was encouraged to bring in. And then we have people working from the fashion industry, from tailoring, and learning from them as well, because there's so many ways you can finish a garment. And sometimes a costume way isn't as good as a bridal way or a fashion way or that kind of thing. And it was very much like learning new things. And my boss is very, very keen on developing people around her and herself. It's wonderful. I think she very much gives off this philosophy of, you never stop learning, which is so true, and it's wonderful.
And nicely collaborative for people who are finding their feet for the first time, I guess. Yeah. And were you kind of working with the actors and actresses? Were you dressing them, or were you largely dressing mannequins?
Mainly mannequins. So within a workroom, they'll generally have, and I think this will be true across all sort of theatre and TV, that you'll have the head cutter and assistant cutter who will go in and do the fittings with the actors and actresses, and that there'll be the designers in there as well. Sometimes if it's something very particular, the person who's making that costume will go in as well, so that they can sort of lend a view on how things can be altered. But then sort of generally it's sort of senior makers, junior makers, trainees, which I went in as, and apprentices don't necessarily go into fittings. It's very rare that they do. I was very lucky that my boss wanted to teach me how fittings etiquette. It's something that you don't think that should be a thing, but it really is. It's sort of like how you sort of where you stand in the space, what you sort of do, things like don't walk across the front of the actor so that you're blocking the view of the mirror, and things like that, that I hadn't necessarily learnt when I was doing my postgraduate, but are really useful to sort of come across a lot more professional. So that was really sort of useful and interesting to sort of witness and be involved with.
Fantastic. But of course this is quite different to what you did at Kent, isn't it? At Kent you read Biosciences and so on, and 2 or 3 years later you're now kind of working in costume making and film and television. How does that relate to what you did at Kent? Is there anything that about what you studied at Kent that's been useful, or has it just been a sort of transformational career?
Yeah, it's I get asked a lot when I'm in the industry, like, why did you transfer from biology and everything? And it's kind of, you can't bring anything across for that. You wasted 3 years. And a lot of people don't realize that no matter what you studied, even if you don't follow into that in your career, you will pull things across from it. I've certainly found that things like the way I ran an experiment throughout my coursework doing Biosciences has actually come in when I went to the National Theatre. I got experience in their dye shop. They're one of the few theatres that has in-house workrooms and an in-house dye shop where they dye up the costumes, break them down. They can do specific prints and patterns for costumes. And I went there to do work experience. I was learning things from them, and they'd set tasks like, we want you to replicate this. And they had their own recipes for how to create a certain ombre and certain dye colour, and I was making up my own. And I was recording it all, sort of going, right, this is sample 1, what I did, this is sample 2, this is my control, and this kind of thing. And I sort of was then presenting my work and going, is this all right? Do you think that's okay? And they're going, yeah, I mean, we're not used to people doing this. Like, that's brilliant. You can actually have a good record of this. And it was because they have these massive folders of samples of how they develop things for their different shows so that they can refer back to it. They have this wonderful archive. And so they were sort of going, this is really good, and we like to see this and want to encourage this, like keep doing this. And it was wonderful because one of my projects was a breakdown project, and they allowed me to use some of their dyes and their paints and everything to work out how to create different techniques and keep the samples so that I could refer to it when I started that project.
Right.
So I had these notes that I referred to like 3 months on, going sample one, that one. It was wonderful and useful, and that sort of also played in with the organisation and timekeeping, which I think not just Biosciences taught me I had to with my coursework and experiments, but also being involved with the choirs. By the third year, I think I was in 3 or 4 choirs. I was doing my dissertation, keeping up with my coursework, and I was doing extracurricular costume making. So I was having to sort of go, I've got half an hour here, can I look at my dissertation a bit and try and improve that? And it's been really useful in terms of costume making, because you have a deadline that you have to meet, and you're trying to go, right, what is the most useful? Do I need help here? Can I do this? And that sort of thing. But also in supervising, because you're having to organise other people around sort of when they've got rehearsals and when they're off site, and also sort of working out within a show, where's the quick change happening, can I get a dresser there in time, is it not going to work, and the communication between things, they're all skills that have transferred from biology. I'm not using I don't know, like the derivation of the Michaelis-Menten equation, I'm not using that, but it's there's other things that I am using, and it's very useful.
I guess, yes, you've taken the discipline of time management and organization, as well as it sounds like you've taken the rigor of your scientific approach and transferred that to costumes and dyes and so on.
Yeah.
So that'll reassure Professor Dan Lloyd that actually the skills you developed as part of the course that he runs have been useful to you in the industry.
Yes, I'm sure my tutors and lecturers will be very grateful that I haven't wasted what they taught me.
And so how did because obviously you were at Kent as an undergraduate and then went to RADA as a postgraduate. How did the two experiences compare? I mean, obviously, one's a sort of historic, cathedral city, and one's the bustling metropole and so on. But the actual experience of sort of, university life at both institutions, how was that for you?
It was very different. So when I came to Kent, I just come out of school, and I was going into this world of, you have, I don't know, 8 to 10 lectures a week, but space in between to catch up on notes, do extra reading, and there was societies and unions and everything. And then when I went to RADA, it wasn't just a change in the sort of landscape, it was also, I was going in 10 till 5, I was working all of those hours, there was no study time, it was you were there and you were learning. And there also wasn't really things like unions and societies, because you were spending all that time either in lessons or prepping for shows. So it's very, very strange. And I in a way, I was very grateful I'd been to Kent to have that sort of typical university experience where you get to interact with people on different courses, because everyone at RADA is aiming to get into the industry, whether it's on a technical side or an acting side. So it's very insular in a way, and there's not a lot of external influence. You have people coming in, we have external designers and external tutors, but that's all to do with the industry. Whereas like being involved in the societies, I was able to talk to people who were studying history or international relations and English literature, and it gave me different perspectives on things, and I was able to sort of start looking at things from other perspectives more. It was easier to access that. I mean, I know RADA has started up these things called the Rickman breakfasts, named after Alan Rickman, who was trained there. And we didn't always appreciate them at the time, because you were getting up and coming into uni at 8:30 and you're going, I don't want to be up this early, I don't want to. But they were really useful because the whole idea around them was that they were bringing people in from other areas of life so that we could learn about their experiences. And it was useful for the actors because they're having to depict different people's lives, but it was also, I found it very insightful and interesting because I come from Biosciences and some different things from people I knew at Kent, but I was hearing talks from war veterans and politicians and child psychologists and that kind of thing, and it was at times it was very deep for a Friday morning, and you were sort of going, oh God, I don't want to start crying, this is really emotional, but I've got a day's work to do.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's about that wider university experience, isn't it, and the social context, particularly at Kent, as you know, extracurricular music brings students together, and postgraduates and undergraduates and staff and external community together as in a way that's not necessarily completely not related to what they're studying or how they're working. And it's about creating that community of musicians working together without the pressure and so on of it being related to your academic studies. So it's I guess it's finding opportunities to make those kind of wider social connections and those cultural connections, isn't it? And in the altos in chamber choir, you would have been sat next to international students, wouldn't you? There were students from Norway reading. I can't remember what there were people reading history and law and psychology and so on. So it's about that sort of richness from interacting with other people who are doing something slightly different to you.
Yeah, and I think particularly when you're going into the arts, to me the arts is very much about making people think, and if you leave a show or finish watching a TV series and you're not questioning something or you're not thinking about something, then it hasn't really engaged you well enough. So to be able to be aware of different perspectives and different cultures and beliefs and experiences in general, then it's really useful when you're creating something. Even if you're not one of the creative team, like a designer or director, you can still bring in those things and you can appreciate those things within the industry. So it's quite a vital part, I think.
And how did you keep going during lockdown? Because obviously after you'd been, working for the circus school and that sudden cutoff point where everything stopped, how did you find ways to keep working or keep motivated?
Yeah, it was it was difficult at times. I created like a long to-do list of things I wanted to do, and things that you put off, where you're like, oh, I'll make myself that pair of trousers, but you're like, oh, I've just come off a sewing machine for 10 hours, I don't want to. And that kind of thing. And sort of also learning new skills, because I'm not very long into the industry, so there's so many things that I'm trying to improve on and also learn, so that I can sort of go, I can do that, employ me.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of stuff like that, and it was very much kind of keeping in touch with those that I'd worked with and helping each other out and being positive as best you could. And I think during the first lockdown, I kept busy enough to sort of not dwell too much on the fact that my industry was crashing essentially and they weren't getting any help. And then I think it was around the September time, that was when we heard that Bridgerton was coming out, and that was a real morale boost. And I was like, okay, it was worth it. I'm going to see what this was for and everything. But then at the same time, it was as the government was doing we can't do more to support the arts, and you need to go and retrain and look for other things. And I was sort of remember being sat there and being like, you're not thinking right now. We don't understand what we're doing. Because like I say, with the Biosciences, I've transferred the skills. So many people within the theatrical and music and TV industry, we already try and apply our skills, and we want to be doing what we do. We always want to be creating. It's not like we're sort of sat there going, we can't do anything, and not doing anything about it. We're doing what we can. I mean, I tried selling things online and that kind of thing, just to keep some kind of flow going. but it's tough when there's sort of a society and a government that's sort of saying the arts industry is a luxury and doesn't contribute, and you're sat there going, but we really do.
Well, I mean, particularly, you know, sort of streaming and television and so on was one of the cultural activities that kept people going, you know, turning to things on iPlayer and Netflix and Amazon Prime and so on, all the films and the plays and the plays from the National Theatre and so on. People were finding ways to keep cultural activities going and to keep sharing with it. So it was a really sort of valuable source for entertainment and engagement and recreation and people's mental sort of well-being, to actually still be watching film and television and so on, even at the same time as you say, you know, artists are being encouraged to retrain. There was a slightly indelicate moment, wasn't there, where all these posters came out and then were very swiftly withdrawn when they realized the crass insult that had just been dealt to the sort of creative industries.
Yeah, definitely. And it was, you know, I've said to people before that if they had to pick any industry to poke at, they chose the wrong one, because we're kind of the one that will make parodies of songs and we'll create our own posters and memes and everything to sort of backlash. And within probably hours of it coming up, you could already see on news feeds and social media the backlash of the arts coming back and going, maybe want to rethink about that.
That's right. I mean, because, you know, the creative industries are people being creative, and if they find themselves pushed into a corner, they will respond in creative ways, won't they, and so on, and ways that can often be very acerbic and very cutting and so on, as a way of because that's part of what we do, isn't it? As you say, we're artists, we're creators, we're used to thinking creatively, and the pandemic has forced us all, I think, to find different ways of doing what we do and engaging people in what we do and keeping ourselves, you know, occupied with doing the things that we love and so on. Yeah. So are you working on anything at the moment? I mean, you know, what is it now? It's January the 7th, and there's the lockdown 3.0 has just come into play. What are the implications for you?
So I'm still going into work. I managed to get back into some work end of November. And so far as I'm aware, we're still able to go ahead, because we as an industry, we just can't work at home unless you're freelancing and sending things off. That's the only way you can work at home. But when you're in a workroom, it's just not really possible to. It's very difficult if you do try.
Yeah.
So it's, so far, touch wood, we're still powering through and everything. And as far as I'm aware, the government have given a go ahead for theatre and film industry where we can work to keep working. I mean, there's so many people I know that I graduated with who are in the theatres, and they're still waiting for theatres to open long enough. And I'm so glad to hear that some of the theatres have been able to put on a few shows at least. But it's sort of scary and sad to see those people that you learnt alongside in that position where they still can't get back into work and everything. It's tough, and to a degree it's part of the industry. There's points where you can't do some work, or there's a lull, and it's something that you accept. But when it's something out of your control like this, it's sort of hard to contemplate it at times and sort of go, what can I do? But everyone's doing what they can, and that's all you can do.
That's right. And so you're able to keep working on another top secret project, is that right, presumably?
Yep. I'm very much very aware now of the industry where it's like NDAs and don't say this and don't say that. So it's very sort of paranoid about what I'm saying and going, is that okay?
Sure. But I mean, with Bridgerton now kind of airing and it's created such a storm, hasn't it? It's really kind of hit headlines and so on. So that must be quite exciting for you to have been a part of that.
Yeah, it's I think it's particularly surreal in the sense that it's the first job that I've done. I haven't had this build up of seeing how things can go. Like, the couple of pieces of freelance work I've done have been quite low media. So I've not really had any feedback as to what things have how they've been viewed. So with this, it was kind of we all knew what time it was coming up on Netflix, and we were, I'm going to watch this now, and before anyone can comment on it. And it's wonderful to sort of see how people are reacting to it, because even within the costume side of things, you can see people having opinions on things, and that's entirely why, I mean, for me, why the arts is so interesting. Everyone has an opinion, whether you agree or disagree. It's something that can be discussed, and it's something that it can lead into not just conversations about the actual show, but externally, things that are about society and everything. It's wonderful to see those conversations happening. So yeah, but it's kind of as a first experience, it's kind of like, wow, okay, this is a lot to take in.
Particularly, I guess, after you've been unable to talk about it and share it with people because of all the non-disclosure agreements that under which you were operating. Suddenly you were able to share what you were doing along with, thousands of viewers around the world.
Yeah, it was surreal. On Christmas Day, I sort of sat and I binged it. I binged the whole thing whilst Mum was like cooking Christmas dinner and Dad was playing with jigsaws. I was like, I'm watching this, you can't. And they'd have points where they'd suddenly hear me scream and they go, what's wrong? I was like, my costume was on screen. It was very sort of surreal moments like that. And then I sat down and was like, okay, we can watch it together now. I know what to look for. And that kind of thing. So it was fun.
Fantastic. So presumably it won't be long until we have the Catriona's Great British Sewing Bee.
I mean, I don't know. I'd have to work out the technology side of that. No, I don't know.
Fingers crossed.
I can't actually. It kind of just started happening. I can't think now where.
No. There was a kind of, after we got over the, oh my God, it's taken us 3 lockdowns and a pandemic for us to actually catch up with one another. The sheer surprise of that. I can't remember how on earth we got into it. Oh dear, hopeless. I should have made notes. You see, I should have had your rigour, and I should have gone, well, this is the way in. This was the working practice. This was how we achieved the end result.
Just write a paper at the end of it and get it published in all the different journals.
That's right, yes. How you organically work your way into a Zoom interview by Dan and Catriona. Lesson 1, make notes. Just remind me what your role, what was your official job title? What were you at Bridgerton?
I was a trainee costume maker.
Trainee costume maker. And is that and when you said you were a junior costume maker, is that what you became afterwards?
Yeah.
It's like a whole sort of, so you go through the experience, and I have moved from trainee to junior. It's like going into a wardrobe in Narnia.
Yes, you gradually work up these ranks that don't sound that different, but somehow are.
Yeah. Okay. A very quick welcome. And you can pretend that you've just joined and we haven't been blathering on for, you can go, yeah, thanks, Dan. You finally sorted out your bloody technology and you were late again. You're such a waste of space. And good morning.